Before we start with the actual topic, I want to very briefly go over the basics again, meaning the prerequisites for this video training. What should you know? Which topics should you have at least a fundamental understanding of to be able to successfully work through this video course? Let's start with the simplest in principle, HTML. You should know what HTML is, what you can do with it, and how to write it. You don't have to be the super expert now, but we will be dealing with HTML when it comes to building templates or integrating templates into TYPO3. And there you should at least know what you're doing and be able to find errors if something doesn't work out. And it just happens that sometimes something doesn't work out. The second is, of course, CSS, cascading style sheets. With this, you can style a website. You can define which colors are used, for example, for fonts, which typefaces, which font sizes, background colors, etc., etc., and naturally much more nowadays here too. You don't have to be an expert, you don't need to know the latest hot stuff, but you should be able to write CSS, change a color sometimes, and find errors if something isn't working. That's quite important. JavaScript, I'll mention here, you don't really need to be able to do it. We won't have too much to do with JavaScript. In the chapter where we integrate a template, we will naturally encounter JavaScript, but we will only implement finished JavaScript, so to speak. But here too, it's naturally helpful if you at least have an idea of the basic functionality, the basic syntax, and if you already know how JavaScript is included and used in a website. That naturally makes troubleshooting easier again if something doesn't work. But as I said, you'll probably need this the least in the entire course. But it's certainly helpful if you have a little bit of knowledge here. Then the bash, or the terminal, or the console. These are all now three terms that basically denote the same thing. People also call it the command line. We will have to deal with this also when it comes to installing TYPO3 or installing extensions. The command line exists in basically every operating system, even in Windows. There you can transmit commands directly to the computer via keyboard, so to speak. And we will need this, as I said, when it comes to installing TYPO3. There are, of course, hosting providers that also offer a one-click installation. That works too. But we will only look at that very briefly on the side. I recommend installing and configuring TYPO3 the way I show it in the videos, and you should at least not be afraid of this console, of this terminal, and know how to use it. But I also show exactly what we need to do there, and you should be able to adapt that for your operating system too. Then what you definitely need is an editor or an IDE. Integrated Development Environment. Sounds very fancy. In principle, it's just a text editor that helps you write, edit, and debug code. IDEs are then a bit bloated, have very many functions, as it also says here. For auto-completion, syntax highlighting, for debugging and validation, etc., etc. I would recommend that you use something like this. Very popular now, for example, is Visual Studio Code. That's also free. Or PHP Storm. I use that for example, it's from JetBrains. It does cost something. I think it's available as an annual subscription. There are also 1,000 other editors, so don't be influenced now by what I use here. It's just habit for me. It developed that way. I use both, depending on the use case, Visual Studio Code or PHP Storm. You just must see what suits you. And as I said, it's relatively unimportant which software you work with. I must say, of course, especially Storm comes with several plugins for TYPO3, for fluid templates, etc., which make our work much, much easier, with auto-completion and syntax highlighting, etc. Something similar in that form also exists for Visual Studio Code, unfortunately not quite as good and not quite as up-to-date. For other editors or IDEs, I don't know if there's anything of that kind. I almost think not. Therefore, I would recommend checking out Visual Studio Code if you don't use it already anyway. Or maybe PopStorm, or I forgot to list this here now, WebStorm. PHP Storm is naturally, as the name suggests, more intended for PHP developers. I'm not a PHP developer, use it anyway, but there's also WebStorm from the same company. That's, I believe, not quite as expensive, although PeepStorm isn't expensive either in my eyes. It's perhaps a bit cheaper, but can also use these plugins that exist there. So you just must see what you feel most comfortable with. The important thing in all these areas we've heard about now, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Bash, etc., is that basic knowledge is sufficient. You don't have to be the super expert in any of the areas. The more you know about them, the better, of course, but basic knowledge should be completely sufficient. If you now say, okay, I've heard of HTML before, but the rest means absolutely nothing to me, then I would strongly recommend that you educate yourself a bit beforehand. Google it, look on Wikipedia. maybe watch 1 or 2 tutorials. Those aren't included here in the course because this isn't about these basics, but it will make your work in the course easier then, I think.